between mind and brain through a correct understanding of the inner constitution of man, particularly of the etheric body and the four centers. 2. To build or construct a bridge between the brain, mind, soul, thus producing an integrated personality which is a steady developing expression of the indwelling soul. 3. To build the bridge between the lower mind, soul, higher mind, so that the illumination of the personality becomes possible. The true education is consequently the science of linking up the integral parts of man, and also of linking him up in turn with his immediate environment, and then with the greater whole in which he has to play his part. Each aspect, regarded as a lower aspect, can ever be simply the expression of the next higher. In this phrase I have expressed a fundamental truth which embodies not only the objective, but also indicates the problem before all interested in education. This problem is to gauge rightly the center or the focus of a man's attention and to note where the consciousness is primarily centered. Then he must be trained in such a way that a shift of that focus into a higher vehicle becomes possible. We can also express this idea in an equally true manner by saying that the vehicle which seems of paramount importance can become and should become of secondary importance as it becomes simply the instrument of that which is higher than itself. If the astral, emotional, body is the center of the personality life, then the objective of the educational process imposed upon the subject will be to make the mind nature the dominating factor, and the astral body then becomes that which is impressed by, and is sensitive to, environing conditions, but is under the control of the mind. If the mind is the center of personality attention, then the soul activity must be brought into fuller expression. And so on the work proceeds, progress being made from point to point until the top of the ladder has been reached. It might be noted here that this entire exegesis of the mind and of the needed bridge building is but the practical demonstration of the truth of the occult aphorism that, before a man can tread the path he must become that path itself. The antichaon is the path symbolically. This is one of the paradoxes of the esoteric science. Step by step and stage by stage, we construct that path just as the spider spins its thread. It is that way back, which we evolve out of ourselves. It is that way which we also find and tread. Some questions answered. I will now attempt to deal somewhat with 3 questions on education asked by one of the students. I can but indicate the ideal, and in so doing I run the risk of producing an effect of being so visionary that any approach under our present system might be regarded as impossible. In answer to the first question, the prime function of all educators is twofold. 1. To train the brain to respond intelligently to impressions, coming to it via the sense apparatus and so carrying information about the outer tangible world. 2. To train the mind so that it can fulfill 3 duties. A. Deal intelligently with information relayed to it by the brain. B. Create thought forms in response to impulses emanating from the physical planes. To emotional reactions set in motion by the feeling desire nature. To the thought world, in which the man's environment is found. C. Orient itself to the subjective spiritual self, so that, from a condition of potentiality, the self may emerge into active government. In this formulation of the function of the apparatus with which all educators have to deal, the mind and the brain, I have indicated the answer to the second question asked, which was: are there definite types of activities, changing with the growing years and based on the phases of the growth process in the individual, that make for his best all-around development? I differ somewhat concerning the periods indicated by such occult teachers as Steiner, for though the 7-year cycles have their place, the division is apt to be over-applied. I would also suggest 10-year cycles of development, divided into 2 parts. 7 of learning and 3 of application. In the first 10 years of a child's life he is taught to deal intelligently with information, coming to him via the 5 senses to the brain. Observation, rapid response, and physical coordination as the result of intention, must be emphasized. The child must be taught to hear and see, to make contacts and to use judgment. And his fingers must then respond to creative impulses to make and produce what he sees and hears. Thus are laid the elements of the arts and crafts, of drawing and of music. In the next 10 years the mind is definitely trained to become dominant. The child is taught to rationalize his emotional and desire impulses, and to discriminate the right from the wrong, the desirable from the undesirable, and the essential from the non-essential. This can be taught him through the medium of history, and the intellectual training, which the cycle of his life makes compulsory under the laws of the country in which he lives. A sense of values and of right standards is thus established. He is taught the distinction between memory training and thinking. Between bodies of facts, ascertained by thinkers and tabulated in books, and their application to the events of objective existence, plus, and here lies a thought of real importance, their subjective cause and their relation to the world of reality of which the phenomenal world is but the symbol. At the age of 17 the study of psychology will be added to the rest of the curriculum, and the nature of the soul, and its relation to the world soul will be investigated. Meditation along suitable lines will be part of the curriculum. It should be noted here, however, that the religious implications of meditation are needless. Meditation is the process whereby the objective tendencies and outgoing impulses of the mind are thwarted, and it begins to be subjective, to focus and to intuit. This can be taught through the medium of deep thinking on any subject, mathematics, biology, and so forth. The tendency of the newer education should be to make the subject of the educational experiment the conscious possessor of his equipment. It should leave him standing clear-eyed before life, with open doors ahead of him into the world of objective phenomena and relationships. It should have brought him to the knowledge of a door leading into the world of reality, and through which he may pass at will and there assume and work out his relation to other souls. The second question relating to the type of experience which would aid the child to round out his development and be supplementary to the compulsory state curriculum is well nigh impossible to answer, owing to the wide differences in human beings and the practical impossibility of finding those teachers who work as souls and as minds. Every child should be studied in 3 directions. First, to ascertain the natural trend of his impulses. Are they towards physical expression, towards manual labor, in which one would include such a wide range of opportunity as that of the mechanical factory worker, and the trained skill of the electrician? Is there a latent capacity for one or other of the arts, a reaction to color and form, or a response to music and rhythm? Is the intellectual caliber one that should warrant a definitely mental training in analysis, deduction, mathematics, or logic? Then perhaps as life goes on our young people will be graded into 2 groups. The mystical, under which heading one would group those with religious, artistic, and the more impractical tendencies. And the occult, which would include the intellectual, scientific and mental types. By the time a child is 17 the training given should have enabled him to strike his note clearly, and should have indicated the pattern into which his life impulses will most probably run. In the first 14 years, opportunity should be given to experiment in many fields of opportunity. Pure vocational training should not be emphasized until the later years of the educational process. The time is coming when all children will be studied in the following directions. 1. Astrologically, to determine the life tendencies, and the peculiar problem of the soul. 2. Psychologically, supplementing the best of modern psychology with the knowledge of the 7 ray types, which colors Eastern psychology, see pages 18 to 23. 3. medically, with special attention to the endocrine system, plus the usual modern methods in relation to eyes, teeth and other physiological defects. The nature of the response apparatus will be carefully studied and developed. 4. Vocationally, so as to place them later in life where their gifts and capacities may find fullest expression, and enable them thus to fulfill their group obligations. 5. Spiritually. By this I mean that the apparent age of the soul under consideration will be studied, and the place on the ladder of evolution will be approximately noted. Mystical and introspective tendencies will be considered, and their apparent lack noted. Coordination between a. brain and the response apparatus in the outer world of phenomena, b. brain and desire impulses, plus emotional reactions, c. brain and mind and the world of thought, d. brain, mind and soul, will be carefully investigated so as to bring the entire equipment of the child, latent or developed, into functioning activity and to unify it into a whole. The third question asks, what is the process of the unfoldment of the intellect in man? How does the higher mind manifest, if at all, in the growing years? It is not possible in the short time at our command to deal here with the history of the progress of mental development. A study of its racial growth will reveal much, for every child is an epitome of the whole. A study, for instance, of the growth of the God idea in the human consciousness would prove a profitable illustration of the phenomena of thought development. A sequence of growth might most inadequately and briefly be tabulated as follows, based upon the process of unfoldment in a human being. 1. Response to impact, the infant sense awakened. He begins to hear and see. 2. Response to possession and to acquisitiveness. The child begins to appropriate, becomes self-conscious and grasps for the personal self. 3. Response to the instinct governing the animal and desire nature, and to human tendencies. 4. Response to the group. The child becomes aware of his environment and that he is an integral part of the whole. 5. Response to knowledge. This begins with the impartation of informative facts, and so to the registration, through the memory, of these facts. Thus are developed interest, correlation, synthesis and application to the exigencies of the life. 6. Response to the innate need to search. This leads to experiment on the physical plane, to introspection on the emotional plane, and to intellectual study, and a love of reading or of listening, thus bringing the mind into some condition of activity. 7. Response to economic and sex pressure or to the law of survival. This forces him to use his equipment and knowledge, and so take his place as a factor in the group life, and to promote group welfare by some aspect of active work, and by the perpetuation of the species. 8. Response to pure intellectual awareness. This leads to a conscious free use of the mind, to individual thinking, to the creation of thought forms, and eventually to the steady orientation of the mind to a wider and wider field of realization and awareness. These expansions of consciousness finally bring a new factor into the field of experience.